Hey guys, how's it going? Twigs here. So I've been seeing this video float around a bit. I've even seen a couple streamers talk about it. I even saw that Tectone checked out this video and was seeing what it was all about. And I'm very familiar with Bellular News, but I just somehow had this video fly under my radar. And honestly, with 1.4 million views, I can see that this video has been doing very well for Bellular News, so this must be really, really informative. And whatever law is going on in I think I heard it was in the UK, it has to be a big deal. So we're going to check out this video, see what it's all about. I'm going to leave a link in the description below for Bellular News so you guys can check him out and hit that like and subscribe button for him. And with that being said, hit that like in. And let's check out the video.
Everyone, today's video is a true bombshell for the games industry. This is one of those things that can have true impact, so let me explain. What just happened is the European Union just rewrote the rules on premium currency in games. Of course, that's the home of Ubisoft, of CD Projekt, of DICE, of Remedy, and so many other companies. And make no mistake, the new rules that they have just laid out could change gaming utterly. Actually change the games that you play. So you know those bundles where you've got to buy more currency than the item that you want costs, or perhaps
oh, and yeah, he just brought up a gacha game. I was about to say, as people who are like us that are very familiar with gacha games, we are very familiar with this premium currency because you got to get the premium currency in order to get the stellar jades or primo gems. So, oh boy, okay.
the idea of limited time events, of no refunds and digital purchases. These are all being fought against by legislators. And when the EU takes action, it's a large enough block that it can reverberate around the world. And as evidence, how's that USB-C charger on our phone working out? There's a lot to talk about. Strap in. This one could actually, honestly, be pretty fucking good. Oddly enough, you've got EU legislation to thank for the standardized phone charger situation and for many, the ability to play ROMs on their iPhone. But now we seem to have EU legislation to thank for premium currency being threatened. So here's what went on. In September 2024, the EU proposed the Digital Fairness Act that was targeting all the practices online that make using digital services miserable. And in particular, it called out dark patterns in video games as one of the targets. And that's basically digital services.
Okay, let's read this. In the mission letter addressed to Commissioner Designate for Democracy, Justice, and the Rule of Law, President von der Leyen refers to the need to develop a Digital Fairness Act to tackle unethical techniques and commercial practices related to dark patterns. Dark patterns are basically when a system that will more than likely lead you to buy something in their store. Like, for example, right now in Honkai Star Rail, there is a spending event going on. And all of that, it's a spending event. It's basically leading you to buy stuff in the store. That is basically a dark pattern because it's wanting you to spend money. It's making sure that you eventually go to the part of the store where you buy the currency to get your stellar jades. Boom. You got to the store. That is a dark pattern. But yes, related to dark patterns, marketing by social media influencers, and addictive design of digital products and online profiling, especially when consumers' vulnerabilities are exploited for commercial purposes.
Miserable, and in particular, it called out dark patterns in video games as one of the targets. And that's basically the gross manipulative techniques that trick and strong-arm money out of people, obviously, especially applying to people who are not yet adults. And this is fairly weighty because in the EU alone, games are obviously big business. Revenues have been going up in the EU. Online game spending in 2018 represented 74% of turnover coming from online revenue and 83% by 2022. That's all of those fun, dark patterns actually working and getting digital currency.
And another, like he just brought up, another example of a dark pattern is the time gate on character banners. As we know, when a character banner rolls around, they're only available for roughly 20 days. So because that clock is ticking, eventually, if, like, let's just say you have shit luck and you really want that character, it can make you over time eventually want to go to that store. So just the natural feeling of, oh shit, I only have like a day left on this character to get this character, and I just still haven't got them, and I don't have any Prima or Jades left. You go to the store. So that is another type of dark pattern, because it eventually leads you to go to the store to buy the currency to get the Jades.
Money out of people, but those dark patterns target the most vulnerable people the most, and there's no one more vulnerable in the eyes of the law than children who spend an average of €31 a month on online games, according to data from Video Games Europe. Well, that's actually went down from 2023. I guess that's good. Everyone's feeling a little bit of the economic pinch, but it's not stopped the EU from taking action to protect kids, basically, from predatory premium currency models. And in situations like this, there's often a great offender, right, that is held up as an example of something doing everything wrong. So you might wonder, is it an Activision game? Is it Ultimate Team from the EA football games? Maybe it was Roblox. No, today, it's a game about horses. It's called Star Stable. You've probably never heard of it, but if this all does turn out good, we'll have the horse girls to thank. This is Star Stable Online. It comes from a Swedish developer called Star Stable Entertainment, and it is the game that may have just rewritten rules and monetization in the EU. So yeah, thanks, horse girls. Now, it turns out that Star Stable just uses all of the premium currency tactics in the book, which makes it a pretty awesome example, right? Especially because it is targeted at a younger audience. So in March 24, the Swedish Consumer Agency filed a complaint with the EU-wide Consumer Protection Cooperation Network. That's a mouthful. And that complaint alleged that Star Stable Entertainment were targeting children and using harmful commercial practices that breached EU consumer regulations. Now, the findings corroborated much of those allegations. They found that the game made direct appeals to children in their ads, that they were using pressuring techniques like FOMO, which is particularly despicable when it's not, on adults.
Let's see this. Direct appeals to children in the advertisements, urging them to buy or persuade adults to buy for them in-game currency. We all seen that before. The use of pressuring techniques such as purchase through time-limited practices to unduly influence children to purchase in-game virtual currency or in-game content. We've all seen that before. A lack of clear and transparent information adapted to children about buying and using in-game virtual currency, leading consumers to spend more than they intend to. We've all seen horror stories about that before. Failure by the company to ensure that the influencers promoting their products clearly disclose commercial content and do not unduly influence children with their marketing techniques. I don't know if I've seen that in the gacha games space that we all inhabit, because for the most part, I feel like the content creators in the gacha game space do a fine job disclosing that they are being sponsored or not. But these first three, 100%, we've all seen this shit before.
And there was a lack of transparency on purchases and loads more things. I mean, here's an example of one that's particularly rough. They were responsible for influencers promoting the game to kids without any disclosure of the spending risk. So, in short, it's bloody well damning. Star Stable Entertainment now have a month to address complaints and propose solutions with their game, but what matters for our purposes today is the Consumer Protection Cooperation Network, we can just call the CPCN. They have laid out what they want. So I'll spell it out via an example. This is what should happen in the ideal world. You, dear gamer, want to buy yourself a new horse. You see that your new horse costs 300 star coins. The store tells you that's around £5, so it just lets you buy 300 coins exactly. You buy exactly what you need for the horse, rather than the current bundles that exist of 200 coins or 400 coins, meaning that you always have to buy with some wastage, which just ends up giving the company more money. So in short, no obfuscation bullshit, no weird tactics. And worst of all for these companies, this will have them bloody well shaking. You'd have to have a refund policy, both for the coins and the horse. And none of this would be pitched as a limited time event where you have got to get the thing right now. So that's an example then of how these policies should be applied, and each is indeed a massive win for consumers. But that would not matter if this amounted to nothing. You could look at all this and think, right, so some Swedish
with her still being in the game forever, and they like put her on a banner where there's still RNG, how would the refund policy? Well, yeah, because if you buy more currency and then you finally get the character, how would that equate to the refund depending on how your RNG was? That would be catchy. That would be tricky.
horse game has got a slap on the wrist. No, it's more than that. This seems to have backbone. So here's the big important bit. These solutions are the backbone of what the European Consumer Organization calls key principles for trustworthy gaming environments. And these could cause huge problems for anyone who is using premium currency. When I say this could shake the foundations of the game industry economy, I absolutely mean it. So these, which I'm going to spell out for you, are the minimum requirements for purchasing and using virtual currencies in the EU. And what's neat is the philosophy behind them. So the CPCN considers these premium currencies as an equivalent to the real money that is used to purchase them. And that for them means that they are just as worthy of legal scrutiny. So you can see how that is in a way a mindset shift that paves the way for actually treating these as they are. So just think about the last game that you played that had a premium currency in it.
Just about every one of them.
I want you to keep it in mind. And with that in your mind, I'm now going to go through the various different practices that this targets. So, prices for premium currency packs that are a little more than the available product. So you've got to buy extra coins, extra gems, whatever it may be. Obfuscation of how much currency is worth by always pairing currency with other items or multiple currency options. As an example, I think World of Warcraft may actually fall for that because it includes Trader's Tender in one of the new mount bundles. Another one, a complete lack of a refund option for making currency purchases or even for in-game items. So there would have to be a refund policy. That's something none of us are used to in these games.
That's true.
FOMO practices to encourage buying, those are going to be looked at. So
when designing commercial practices that encourage the purchase and or use of in-game virtual currencies, including advertising marketing techniques, consider the specific vulnerabilities of players' demographic and ensure that they do not exploit these vulnerabilities or unfairly influence the economic behavior of these consumers. Okay.
Some of those may no longer be allowed. And all of these practices are now something that the EU can hold against developers and publishers. Even more so if the parental controls of said game are not up to scratch. So it's less a case of me saying, can you think of any game that falls into those categories? And it's more me saying, can you think of a game that doesn't fall into those criteria? It's fairly humongous, which might indeed be the point here. We know this is something the EU have been thinking about in other circumstances than just Star Stable. As an example, in September 2024, the European Consumer Organization published a report on popular online games. And in that report, they targeted Diablo 4, EA Sports FC 24, Minecraft, Fortnite, and a bunch of others. And it was all about how the virtual currencies work. They were not thrilled on what they found in those games, right? Because many of them, well, they did the same things that, Star Stable did that we do not like. And that straight up means we can say that Electronic Arts and Blizzard Entertainment are being directly targeted by this body. That really is something. So it's no wonder that the BEUC will be holding workshops to help European companies implement these new principles. Because it seems they may actually have to implement them. Everything that they previously thought was acceptable pretty much now isn't. And that, here's the shocking thing, that's not my commentary. That is what the industry response has been, so we know they are shaking in their boots. It ain't surprising the industry bodies aren't thrilled about this, and a big shout out to...
The funny thing is that, a lot of these companies are going to be heavily hit by this. But the one that I know will be hit by this the hardest is gacha games. Because they use all these predatory practices. When we saw the layout of the 4 big things that they are targeting with their law, like on what they're looking for when it comes to protecting children and cracking down on these types of practices, it all was just about gacha games. Because, like I've said many times, they create these problems and they abuse these problems with their predatory practices. So gacha games, it will basically, if this ends up being 100%, if this all goes through in the UK, gacha games will have their whole monetary system, their whole banner system completely shaken up by this. Like, it will literally turn everything on its head. And honestly, I can't wait to see it happen. I will relish in it happening. Because it's gotten to the point where gacha games do need to basically be redone. The predatory practices are getting out of hand. We've been seeing this in Genshin Impact and now Honkai Star Rail. And it's getting to the point where it needs to be railed in. It needs it. It's getting way too predatory. The games are basically being ruined by these practices. And that's why I'm going to relish in it. I'm going to love every bit of this happening.
To one of our Bellular Games members, Neo Nebulosa, for directing us to this stuff. So the European Game Developers Federation and the Video Games Europe, or two groups basically, they've published a joint statement that expresses their disappointment with the findings. Let's read their statement. Quote, "We are disappointed by the lack of engagement from the CPC network in creating these principles, which introduce new legal theories and misguided interpretations of EU consumer law that will create confusion and disruption for European customers." Sidebar. Oh no, we're going to be disrupted by sort of annoying predatory stuff going away. What an awful disruption. Back to the statement. It will also present a challenge to the industry's future growth and could even deprive millions of consumers access to their favorite games. Now that last bit is the interesting thing. So understandably, right, these groups, representing the most powerful players in the industry, did quite like things the way that they were. Change is dangerous, especially to the bottom line, and especially change like this. But in a way, they're not inherently wrong. It is true that audiences do actually understand premium currencies by and large right now, and when implementing currencies, these companies were following, their best legal guidance, and now that guidance has changed. I guess just like how so many phones had like a bespoke charging cable until the rules just changed in the middle of the game. So now they've got to get used to these new rules. And what'll sting is the impact on their bottom line. They're not wrong about the potential impacts of all of this. Now, big companies like Ubisoft can probably absorb the costs of any legal challenges or damage from rebuilding their premium currency systems. They'll probably spend a whole lot to try and figure out ways around these principles. As for smaller companies, well, they may not find that so easy. But where things will be dramatic is the group's final warning, because it's the most threatening one. It's the idea that players in the EU may just be locked out of video games. They'd say with a game like Overwatch, right? They would simply choose to geo-restrict access to the game rather than change their monetization model or to just continue the game as normal and risk EU lawsuits. It could just be they look at the EU and think, you know what, we make enough from the States and other countries, we really don't need them. That being said, the EU population is kinda huge. Overall GDP is obviously a very, very flawed metric, but
that would be absolutely crazy. That would be insane. And don't get me wrong, it's not like it's unheard of. We have seen games in the past, like for example, mostly games made in China, where they just basically let their game just stay in China. And then and they do fine. They literally do fine, but that's because they have made sure that the budget that they are working with is enough to be able to keep the game company going just in China. And that's it. That's why we have we see a few, I can't say a lot, but we see a few games that are only CN only. For example, Girls Frontline 2 was a CN only game for a little bit, before it did come to global. And so I will say it would not be unheard of to see a game just operate on one server in one area. But it would be crazy if a game is so dead set on being predatory, if a company is so dead set on being predatory with their game, that they basically allow their game to operate everywhere but in Europe. That would be crazy. That would be like, okay, just tell me that you just want to keep your predatory practices. Just say it out loud. Oh man, that would be wild. That would be crazy. That would be insane. I would literally like laugh my ass off if I saw that happen. Just because that would basically scream, or someone ask, hey, who wants to continue their predatory practices and not change? And then you just see the company go, me, I want to keep on scamming my customers.
But as an example, right, just Googling this here in 2024, the EU's nominal GDP was about 17.9 trillion and 1/6 of global nominal GDP, which is quite a lot of money, and a hell of a lot of that GDP globally will be in other countries like, say, China, where a lot of these companies will not be able to go in and directly monetize. That could actually mean that they will feel the need to change. And in a way, there are two wolves inside me who are fighting, right? I suppose one of them is the pragmatic wolf. The other one is the almost like the last vestiges of some sort of libertarian idealism that says, let the market decide. If the gamers do not like the bad practices, the gamers shall not partake in them, and the market will solve the problem. And I wish that was true, but I feel there's almost a faux idealism in so much of that, because these psychological hooks, these psychological triggers, they do actually work. We're in a world where you can...
Oh, dude. Bellular, you have no idea. And you guys will more than likely know where I'm coming from. The Genshin Impact defenders, the Hoyo Shields, the toxic positivity that exists, not just in the Genshin Impact world, but honestly in the gacha game space altogether. The ones that will defend their favorite company, the one that we're most common with is the Hoyo Shields. There are a few Kuro bots out there, but the Hoyo Shields definitely. That will defend their company, my multi-billion-dollar company, to the death. Because if I upset them, if I aggravate them, if I make them hate me, they won't put as much currency in the game anymore. So I have to defend my favorite company. They're doing no wrong. I don't mind if they fuck me from every once in a while. Those guys will defend the predatory practices of their favorite dev studio. In this case, we're mostly focusing on Hoyo, just because it is all they know. So I see where he's coming from. Sometimes there are people out there so blind to how much their favorite company is fucking them. They don't understand that, and at the end of the day, people are the people that are sane, the people that are telling them how it is, that you are getting fucked, that they need change to like basically happen before them, so that they realize, oh, I was getting fucked. I was getting screwed over. And then we're like, yeah, you were getting fucked. What he's basically saying here is that sometimes the market doesn't understand that what's going on is actually wrong. And sometimes you need, in this case, laws to basically come in and force these companies to actually do something that's actually fair for the consumer so that the consumer can actually get what they need and want, which is a fair economic landscape.
Can very easily make, I think, some sound enough, philosophical arguments very much against regulation and all of that. And I totally get that. I'm fairly sympathetic towards that in many cases. But the thing is, we've also got to be pragmatic. And a part of that is being a bit humble about the human condition. And the fact of the matter is, these practices are not popular. People do not like them. Yet,
for the most part, sane people don't like them.
And these obviously are bad. And as people who enjoy video games, we see that as these types of practices derive more and more revenue, they then become what the companies focus on. And that is worse for the actual video games. Because I suppose in a way, how much of game industry revenue...
And he's not wrong. Because at the end of the day, and this is part of why the sane part of the player base who understands these practices are wrong, we see that honestly, these predatory practices ruin the game at the end of the day. To speak in gacha game terms, when these, like, we'll look at Honkai Star Rail. Honestly, you can even apply this to Genshin Impact as well with the latest Spiral Abyss and Genshin Impact. At the end of the day, the reason that the sane portion of the community of gacha games hates these predatory practices, hates how these games have been handled by Hoyoverse specifically, is because it has ruined the game states, because they're so dead set on, like, let's say with the last few characters in Honkai Star Rail, just power creep, consistently building and building and building to the point where you literally pretty much need the newest characters in order to beat some of these MOCs. It's done on purpose. They increase the HP and the resistances of the newest enemies in the MOC, but in order to counteract that, you need characters that will have higher damage numbers. And so this keeps on spiraling and spiraling to the point where you have a character who has a has an ult damage multiplier of around nearly 800, and then you look at Seela, and the highest she can get is around 400. I'm estimating because I don't have the actual damage numbers in front of me, but it was basically kind of like that. And so power creep in Honkai Star Rail is done on purpose. Why? Because they want to make sure that the newest character is tantalizing enough that you want to pull them. That's all about that FOMO. This is all about that dark pattern that these EU lawmakers are talking about. That is why these predatory practices need to be cracked down on, and why apparently the EU lawmakers are wanting to crack down on it, is because it's all predatory. And it's not healthy for these, there's more specifically looking at children, but children are the most susceptible because they're going to just see this problem and go, oh, I can spend money and it will basically pan out. They will get their parents' credit cards and then they will swipe. And you can say, well, that's on the parents. The parents shouldn't do that. Yes, you are right. The parents should be more careful with their money. But that doesn't solve the problem at the end of the day, which is the problem exists. Yes, two things can be true at the same time. We can shit on the parents for not being more careful with their money, but we can also shit on these companies for making the problem to begin with. Like I said, and I will repeat this, two things can be true at the same time. And so, back to my original point, when these companies create these predatory practices, they do make the game worse in the process. Honkai Star Rail and Genshin Impact's case, especially Honkai Star Rail, it's power creep. Power creep has made the game worse, and it was done on purpose so the company could abuse it and make money off of it. And with a lot of these other games that do do these predatory practices, they're also doing the same thing by making the game worse. Because now, in some cases, getting these characters is not about playing the game and getting the character. It's about, oh, well, I need to spend money to get this character. And that is a problem, because it just ruins the state of the game.
Comes essentially from psychological manipulation and these various business strategies that are designed to rake in revenue in a way that's not like really tied to the experience of a game that you purchase. We've just seen the share of that increase and increase and increase, and it's no wonder that as that is increased, the rest of us have become less and less satisfied with games. So in a way, if this does hurt the revenue of a bunch of companies and unfortunately leads to a bunch of job losses because these types of practices are no longer viable, good riddance. Good riddance, absolutely. Let the companies fail, let those jobs go down. How we run things should be a dialogue between the private and public sectors, and in a case like this, I think it's an example of the public sector, right? The people essentially saying, we actually do not like this practice. We don't want this to be the rules of the game. We want the rules of the game to change, to be more robust. And the market will, once it adapts to that, find a solution. And if the new rule set is a better rule set, then that should be a net good. But of course, none of this will matter if there's no enforcement. And
what he just said there did sound a little harsh, and I would agree with that. But there is a chance that they'll do layoffs, and that does suck. That will suck. But the problem is that don't blame the laws that are only being enforced to help out the consumer. Blame the company for capitalizing on these predatory practices in order to make money. Do I understand it? Yeah. Path of least resistance. Of course, they're going to do it, but at the same time, understand, you are doing a predatory practice. You probably are aware that what you are doing is very scummy. You probably know in the back of your mind that eventually, at some point in time, there's going to be regulation on what you are doing because it's predatory and scummy. And so the only thing, you should not be surprised when it does eventually happen that laws and regulations do catch up, and you will experience some lack of revenue coming in because of the new laws and regulations that are cracking down on what you were doing. So that's what my point is. It sucks that there probably will be layoffs because we know the executives and the CEOs won't shave off their revenue just to compensate. Because unfortunately, these guys are more than likely assholes. And so the only thing you can blame is the people who decided that they want to go down that route of the predatory and scummy practices. That's why you're losing your job, because your company decided to do a predatory practice rather than run their company in a more fair way.
enforcement, because one country making a digital consumer policy often will find difficulty in enforcing it because you're just one little guy, Mr. Belgium, right? That's why even though Belgium has banned loot boxes, so many games simply just ignore that and still operate in the country. Like in World of Warcraft in the new raid, one of the bosses is basically a slot machine boss. We always have the joke that for the person in our team that's in Belgium, that boss just can't drop any loot. I don't know, there's an EU firewall or a Belgian firewall. That's a joke, but you get the point. As much as many people have kind of went, Belgium, you, take him down. It hasn't really mattered because it's just Belgium, just one little guy. It's a bit different here though. And that's because the EU is, 26 other countries and also Belgium. In 2023, it was worth 25.7 billion euro in game revenues. That's a lot of revenues. And we know that their legislators are willing to take on the likes of Apple and Google when their rulings are being defied. They have done that. But more than that, the companies inside the EU are, part of a big global network, and that does mean that whenever USB-C cables become standardized in the EU, they then become standardized everywhere because of manufacturing limitations. I'm sure Apple would have loved to have continued just selling people Lightning adapters in the States, but ultimately they seem to have saw the way the wind was blowing and made the big change to USB-C. No one wanted to have, of course, a whole factory just making EU-only phones. And again, thinking about the impact that would have had on the whole ecosystem of manufacturing partners, blah, blah, blah. So you can see how with hardware, it does kind of make sense. We can see those software examples where it's not really the same thing. It's not like you can just go and get an emulator for your iPhone in America, but you can in the EU. So the question then is, will developers want to risk losing a large slice of that EU-derived money? Or will they simply have to ship a cut-down and less exploitative version of their in-game monetization to European countries? If so, it puts them in a fun little dilemma where the American gamer may get a transparently worse deal than, say, the European gamer. And then you can say, well, compare your store to mine. My one is a bit more respectful.
Exactly. And that's going to create a dilemma if they go that route. If all this goes down, and if it does pan out that the EU server gets a more fair deal than, let's say, the US and everywhere else, everyone is going to bitch. Everyone is going to shit on this because we're all going to, every one of us that's outside of the EU will be basically saying, these motherfuckers are getting this 10 times more easy than we are. What the fuck? And that's what's going to go down. It will basically create a shitstorm of everyone screaming, this isn't fair. If they do a system where EU on their server gets a more fair deal than everywhere else, I wouldn't be surprised, but at the same time, I want to see it just to see the shit show that happens from it.
Doesn't have as much FOMO, doesn't have as many tricksy bundles and things that basically feel like a scam. And that'll be a bad look. That's the dilemma that these companies face, and in a way, it's all thanks to a game about horses. So, hero of the day? Horse girls. I guess that's a thing. Okay, tell you what though, if you want another story, another big, grand, juicy story, check out this one. It also hits the EU, but it also hits corporate melodrama, which is honestly some of my favorite.
But absolutely great video. And it does definitely, and he did a great job of summing up everything about why this law that's going on and being passed around and being discussed in the EU is potentially going to be a big thing, because he's not wrong. And and he made a great comparison when the EU did pass that law that they only take USB-C. It did shift the whole phone market. Every phone now is pretty much USB-C, which didn't bother me because I'm an Android user, so that didn't affect me at all. But it did make a big shakeup. iPhone had to switch to USB-C because it was just so much more convenient. And same thing here. If this law does go through, and the EU basically says in order for your in-game store to work in our country, you have to play ball and make a fair store under our rules and regulations. And that will shift the whole market, especially the gacha game market. The gacha game market, in my opinion, will definitely be put on its head. It will shift everything about the gacha game market. And I will be very, very, very interested to see how gacha games basically adapt to that situation. Because, like I said, it will shake the gacha game market to its core. But great video by Bellular News. I'll leave a link in the description below. Hit that like button for him. Hit that subscribe button for him. like I said, I've seen quite a few of his videos in the past. He makes great gaming news videos, and I enjoy them. And I can absolutely see why this video got 1.4 million views in 9 days. Fantastic video. And honestly, and I'm going to just speak from my own personal opinion, I actually do hope that this passes in the EU. I want to see the gacha game market, all these gacha games, basically change and for the better. And this will, in my humble opinion, change the gacha game space for the better, because making these games more fair and more consumer friendly, when Hoyoverse especially has become more and more predatory, it will be a net positive. And I believe that with every fiber of my being. So, great video about Bellular News. Can't say enough good things about him. He definitely deserves that like and subscribe button. I'll say it one more time. I'm going to leave a link in the description below for him. And while you're at it, hit that like and subscribe button for me. I greatly appreciate it. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll catch you guys later.